Jessie, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and I'm really excited to kind of get into your story because leadership for me is it's a journey, but we all define it differently based off like our experiences that we've lived through. And you have such a very interesting background, so I'd love to get into that and then the book that you wrote because I think that there's a lot of wisdom from there that can be shared today, especially today, to help leaders kind of within their journey. But I would wanted to start off with just turn it over to you. If you could define who you are to our listeners, it's a big question up front.
Sure, it is the question, right? Funny enough, so the book I'm here to talk about is Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky: Lessons We Can All Learn from an Unexpected Leader. Now, this is a book I wrote. It's my second book because of who I am. So
Yeah.
you asked my identity. It's interesting that the first chapter I speak of there is identity. It's something that we always question, I think, but me as an immigrant child coming to America, I think I've been questioning it more so, especially recently or the last, well, it's coming up on 2 years now that since Russia has invaded Ukraine, it's been a very personal issue and question for me because so I was a child of the former Soviet Union. I came
Mm.
to America as a refugee. We sought permission to leave. We sought asylum. We got there eventually after spending time in Europe while waiting in various places. It is interesting because that does end up defining you, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
The refugee story does. But when I was here, I just really wanted to be American. Now I know that I'm fully American while also being many other things. But as a child, you just want to fit in. So my name was Asya. I changed it to Jessie. I Americanized really as quick as I could. I got rid of my accent. I hope you don't hear it, because otherwise I want my money back from that coach.
I feel much worse of an accent than you do. So that's maybe I need to go get someone to coach me on that.
No, because yours is lovely. And actually, I would have saved my money too. But actually, honestly, so I was a Russian speaking kid. I was from
Mm.
Latvia. The Soviet Union was then, had taken over all the neighboring countries, including Latvia. So Russian was my primary language, and it's a very harsh accent.
Yeah.
So, like I lived my life here and I Americanized quite well. I was an actress in my early 20s, a struggling actress vying for the Hollywood dream. And I happened to be in a movie once, on a movie set of a Russian speaking movie. This time, being an immigrant got me a paycheck it never had before. And so this was in New York. And I had a part in a movie where the star was Vladimir Zelensky.
Mm.
This was 2009. He was one of three major stars, Russian speaking actors, comedians from various neighboring countries, former Soviet republics. And so this movie was shot, and I went on with my life. Eventually, I threw in the towel on acting, got married, live in a really lovely, quaint American town, have two kids, live my normal life. And I realized my brother actually texted me, and I realized that I had once been in a movie with the now president of Ukraine. So I realized he had
Yeah.
been elected. This was 2019. So that's when I really started following Zelensky's story because 10 years before he was elected in Ukraine, I was on a movie set with him. So obviously I had to follow this person more closely. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm going to cut my quick introduction short by way of, introducing also the book. But basically that's me. I'm a writer. I'm a mom. I am an American, but also an immigrant. And also I like to think of myself as citizen of the world.
I love that, and part of what I like to do on this podcast is to kind of like walk through that journey that led you up to the point that you are on now, that inspired you to write that book. So I definitely want to like revisit a lot of those touch points that you had. But before we do, I would love to hear how you define leadership in your own terms, and maybe how has that changed, starting off in the Soviet Union, and then coming into the U.S. as an immigrant, and then being part of like the Western culture. How has that shaped your definition of leadership?
And I would just like to add, like, yes, I'm part of the Western culture, but I'm a real spiritual geek. Like I'm
Mm,
a woo-woo person all the way. Um, I like to call myself Buju, which is a joke. I was born Jewish, but I'm really a Buddhist. So lots of definitions as you go. But spirituality also features very heavily in my idea of leadership. And I'll
yeah,
get to that. So let's start with the Soviet Union, as you said, very authoritarian,
yeah,
clearly. Still the case now. I say to people who are interested in talking to this with me, talking about this with me, that look, Putin, the president of Russia, was a KGB operative.
Hmm.
KGB, for those who don't know, was a very brutal arm of the Soviet Union that was responsible for the jailing and deaths and of many people. So essentially, who's the lead? It's Putin and other KGB cronies who are in charge of Russia. So it's basically Soviet Union renamed as Russia. I like to tell people that because I don't think everyone understands that, and it's an important message to get across. The leadership style there is completely different. I
Yeah.
know we have a lot of conversations, and I'm glad we do because we're a democratic country, about loss of freedom in many ways. And look, we're a democratic, self-correcting system. I see that all the time. It doesn't mean we're not a mess sometimes. Clearly we
Yeah.
are. But I would like to say it's a huge, huge difference. Styles of leadership in authoritarian places like the Soviet Union, now Russia. Basically, growing up as a child there, you really learn to not even question authority. You're not even allowed to question authority because you know that questioning
Mhm.
authority gets you followed by the KGB and thrown in jail. This has happened to my ancestors, to my grandfather. My dad was followed by the KGB once. He was a musician. He played. So basically, you learn through fear as a child. So leadership is really forceful and fear based. That was
Mm.
And look, it does shape how you evolve as a person because
Yeah.
you live fear based for a while. It stays with you. It stays with your brain, and it actually there are neuroscience proves how consistent, repetitive things like fear based authority it remains in your brain. So in my many years in America, which I've been here since I was 8, I've been working on removing that fear because I think one thing that we have, which is really cool, we have 1,000 different styles of leadership here.
100%. Yeah. There's so many.
There's so many. So you really get to choose. And so as a mom, that's my big leadership role, the biggest leadership role. Because otherwise I'm a writer. It's a really solitary profession.
Yeah.
As a mom, I'm not a fear-based leader. You can ask my kids. Sometimes I need a little more fear in it, but I really stay away from that. So it's made me more inventive as a leader.
Hmm.
Even before becoming a mom, I was in the corporate world for a while. I was in advertising. I once had to manage like many interns for several years. And I look for inspirational type of leadership. And how can you inspire the people that you are leading to do their best, their greatest? And if you can empower them, however you can help them, however you can empower them to reach for their best, I think you're going to
Yeah.
win, even if their best looks a little different than what you would think.
I love that. And my definition of leadership is down to one word. What you just said hit the nail on the head. It's to inspire. Because when we inspire, it's through our words and it's through our actions. And you hit so many great points on that. So Russian authoritarian style leadership, what does that really mean? And I was really hoping that you would be able to define that. And you summed it up so beautiful. And it's fear. It's through fear. So you're acting through fear. And what does that hamper in the military? And this is why I think it's going to be really cool because we're going to get a different perspective and I could put like my military hat on. One of the key attributes of our military and then our NATO partners and alliances is how we run tactical mission operations. And we have a concept that's called mission command. And I think it's an ADP 6-0, but mission command is essentially allowing you to run decentralized operations and giving authority down to the lowest level, but also empowering them to make those decisions. So authority and power pushed down to the lowest level possible for us as the non-commissioned corps at the rank of E5, 18 to 21-year-old men and women that can make those decisions versus going all the way up to the top and to the top of the leadership hierarchy, which really is probably Vladimir Putin or some general. And what does that do? It just stymies growth and movement and momentum. That is one of the biggest reasons for me personally, that I think that the Ukrainian military is done so well in the modern conflict with Russia, which is a travesty in itself. It really is. But it's because they have that level of mission command of where they trust and they empower and they inspire others. Zelensky does it through his words and his deeds. I remember one of his quotes when it kicked off, and there was a President Biden was like, "Hey, we're sending a plane to you." He's like, "I don't need your plane. I need bullets." And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, like mic drop right there. And I was that dude is someone who is going to inspire, and he's done that. He's done it to the point of where other people from other countries are willing to come and fight for him. You said another thing that I absolutely loved when kind of throwing that fear hat on. And I wrote down fear, and I used an excuse for it as finding excuses and reasons not to take action. But we have to be able to turn fear in a way to kind of like inspire us. And I think that's what we do very well from the Western side versus the Eastern side, is that we love the discomfort and the space because it stretches us. That's why we're so innovative. We're so curious. And you can see that through the technology we have. So mic drop moment for how you define leadership. So I think we could just end this episode now. But joking.
We're
So
basically done. We're done.
yeah. So kind of continuing, I read your backstory, and your family has not only did you grow up in Russia, but you also had family members that were part of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And I think you growing up in that level of just such a rich wisdom base of all the pain that people have went through. How did that kind of shape you? And I think you also use the concept that children are mirrors, which I absolutely love. Don't don't
And that's
don't
a
hate me
Zelensky
that
concept. That's a Zelensky concept, by the way. That's
oh,
yeah.
could you get into that? Maybe share some of those stories?
Sure, I'd love to. So, look, anybody of my generation who had Holocaust surviving grandparents is affected by that. Again, like it or not, a lot of our who we become
Yeah.
happens before we're born. And since there is a big war going on now, I think constantly about the kids who don't even realize how that's going to affect them and then their kids. Unfortunately, the ramifications of violence last for generations. For me, it was something I knew probably way too early. If I think about it, so my grandma, my babushka, as she was called, my grandma, really raised us. Immigrant parents have to work their butts off. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's the only way that we were going to make it here. So she took care of us. So these are stories I listen to constantly. And it's funny because in raising my kids, I feel such a protectiveness of not wanting to burden them with the reality of the world. That was
Yeah.
all crushed when the war in Ukraine began. Because so my dad is from Ukraine. I've
Mm.
been there. My grandfather, who was, speaking of the Holocaust, he was a World War II hero. He was injured many times, fought for the Soviet army against the Nazis. I think he's rolling over in his grave. I just think about how he's buried in Vinnytsia in Ukraine.
Oh,
He
wow.
fought against terror. It's a very difficult situation to acknowledge that this is literally the phrase of the Holocaust is never again, that we're not going to let it happen again. And it is happening. It is happening. I do believe that the world is stepping up this time.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of conflict. We're not going to get into the politics of this, but I think ultimately the world will not allow Russia to win this. And like you said, there's a lot of differences in even how the fight goes on from the Ukrainian side, from the Western side. I mean, Ukrainian military has been heavily influenced by American military tactics. And, I just always believe freedom will win. But that being said, the story of the Holocaust, so you can look at it and just be really sad.
Yeah.
That's not constructive. I look at it, and one of the things Zelensky has said, his grandfather too had fought the Nazis. He was the sole surviving son of three, the grandfather. So it's interesting that President Zelensky is the grandson of the sole surviving brother of people who perished in the Holocaust and in the army
Oh, wow.
in Ukraine. Yeah. So he had said, in the darkest of times, there's always light.
I love that.
He says that every year on there's a memorial that goes on. A lot of people died. A lot of Jews died in Ukraine during the Holocaust. So he does a memorial service, and he says that every time. And so that's what I remember. Because you know what? My grandmother did survive. And then, my parents were born and I was born, and various grandparents who suffered and ran during that time. My grandparents in Ukraine really had to during, World War II. It was World War II. And unfortunately, while some form of it is repeating again, I remember those are very important words for me to remember,
Yeah.
that the light will triumph.
There's the quote that I always kind of go back to, and I love Buddha Jew. I don't think I've ever heard that term before. So
Did
that
you?
that is, yeah,
Sweet.
that is super cool. But for me, because we all have like our own spiritual backing, I think
Yep.
based on like my leadership, it's very heavily influenced from scripture from a Christian perspective. But there's a Matthew chapter 5:14 through 16 quote that basically sums up that you are the light of the world, and it kind of talks about like no matter how dark it may seem, that there is always a glimmer of light, and it doesn't matter how dark it is, that light will always overcome the darkness. And I love that, exactly what you just said. And the other
I'm a
critical
big
thing.
fan of quotes, Jesus Christ quotes as well, because, well, how could you not be? And I think it's interesting. One of the things that, unlocking your inner Zelensky, the reason I wrote it is not because I wanted to just be like, oh, I just want to spread more information. That is a
Yeah,
useful tool that I can, while here, also be like, also maybe explain why support for Ukraine is important. That's a
yeah,
positive. That's a side. That's like a side part of that. But the truth is, I wrote it because you brought up the scriptures. That's why I wanted to bring this up, because Jesus always taught that what I can do, you can do too. To
yeah.
his followers, right? That was a big part of his teachings. That just with faith alone,
Mhm.
right? The faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. So Zelensky, from the beginning, from the time he got elected in 2019, he said, I'm not a politician. I'm just a simple person who has come to break down the system.
I That was one of my top 3 quotes that I wrote down for this episode, that
Right.
I wanted to get into. So, yep, I love it.
And he always said, so he was, given the Time Person of the Year award
Mhm.
last year. And he was like, he was named like leader of our time. And he was like, every single one of us is the leader of our time.
Yeah.
And his constant, and in many of his interviews, because obviously I had to sit through many of them, and they were honestly a pleasure. He's like a he's like a machine who just says wisdom. And it's, interestingly enough, some of his closest advisors were like, no, he's the man speechwriter, and when you work as his speech writer, what you have to do is write quickly,
Hmm.
because he speaks in ready-made speeches and sentences. He's a wise being. This is his I guess innate gift. But one of the things he said constantly in his interviews and his speeches, he's always like, I'm just a guy. I'm a regular person. I'm a regular person who has come to change things. And then when asked, how do you do this day in, day out? How do you keep doing the work that you do for your people? He's always like, well, I can't be worse than my people. My people are doing a great job. My nurses and doctors, are teachers, are servicemen, are military, like they're all putting everything they have into what they're doing, so I have to do the same.
Yeah.
So one of the major tenets of unlocking your inner Zelensky is this idea of removing the limits around this idea of ordinary. We're all
Mm,
ordinary people, and we're all leaders of our time. So that means there's no limits to what any one individual can accomplish.
mm. There's, 2 things that I pulled from that: authenticity and alignment. I think one of the biggest reasons that Zelensky is so influential, especially when he speaks, is that it's not from a canned, like, script writer. It comes from the heart. So, he's very authentic with his words, and then he also models the way. So, I always have a saying, "Deeds, not words," because actions speak louder than any words. But the second is alignment. And I believe it comes through head, heart, and hand. And Jerry St. Pierre, I think one of my good friends kind of coined that term. But we have to be able to see it. We have to be able to feel it. And when we can connect alignment between our head and our heart, then we can go do it. And then that's what Zelensky is so powerful at doing, is that he can create that alignment between people's heads and hearts to where it inspires them to go take action. So again, I love all of that. But
By the
kind
way,
of
that's so spiritual. The head heart alignment is such a spiritual idea. I love that too.
there was another thing when I was looking through kind of your history, because I think it's a deep level of resilience on your part of how you were able to go through the storm, I think, of being an immigrant in America and all the adversity that came with that, with the different labeling that you thought you had to kind of change who you were. And you had like a dawning or a moment of where you realized that after having children, that you wanted to create strong women. And then in order to do that, you had to be one. So I wonder if you could kind of take the time to walk through that mindset shift, because I think that that's critical of being able to be resilient, especially as a leader, regardless of your environment, but then also being able to shape your environment so you can continue to grow.
Yes, thank you for that question. And interestingly, to get back to what you had mentioned, the chapter about there's a chapter in Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky that's called
Yeah.
"Children as Guideposts."
Oh, I
But you're
love that.
right that I had once said children are mirrors of our former selves. That's I remember I think there was an older essay that was turned into a video essay. I know exactly what you're talking about now, but it's interestingly that I also have in this book Children as Guideposts. When he was elected, he had said, "Don't hang my picture on the wall, hang pictures of your children and look at them every time you're about to make a decision."
Mm,
And so what I loved, again, another reason I wrote this book is I love that you can take these leadership qualities of an actual leader, right? An actual leader of an entire country, not to mention a country in war, but you can take those tenets and use them in your own life because we're all leaders, even in the smallest ways. So for me, I realized in the least, I had to lead my daughters.
yeah.
And that was a really inspirational, it has been a very inspirational experience for me. It's really made me a better self because having two daughters, I realized how important their mother is to them, not just in taking care of them, which I do, and all of the stuff that we do as parents, I do that, but as a person that they look at, how is she in the world? Because we often kids, they emulate what they see even more than what they hear.
Mm,
So if I'm bringing myself in the world as a really insecure, angsty person, which does live inside me, but if I'm constantly that angsty, insecure, struggling person, they're going to emulate that like it or not. So it's made me elevate myself to how can I reach for a stronger version?
there's a concept that I have, and I think we're alignment there. And like a rule of leadership is mirrors, and exactly what you kind of just summed up is that whatever we do, whatever we say, is emulated within our organization or our family. And I have a pretty strong morning routine. So like every morning I get up at 4 because I have to because I'm an active duty Army officer. I'm actually off today because it's my birthday. I
Oh,
but
happy
yeah,
birthday. Oh,
thank you.
You're a Libra. I know you
Oh
better now.
yeah. Yeah, I'm an October baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, but kind of when I started doing that morning routine very deliberately and intentionally, I started seeing my daughter, more so because she was more mature, starting to emulate some of the behaviors that I had. So I always try to read and always try to journal. Well, she just had her birthday in September, so this year she wanted a journal so she could start journaling on things, and then she always takes the time to read now. And that it's funny that that is a critical lesson that I wanted to make sure that it's sticky in this episode is what we do, it echoes more than what we say, sometimes, because I'm not the most articulate person when I come to talk to my daughter or my son about parenting. My wife is way better than that, but I'm very good at kind of modeling the behaviors that have made me successful throughout my career. And now I'm starting to see that in my children. And it's funny when you're talking about that, I was kind of like reflecting on that is so powerful of how we show up in this world is more impactful for other people, because they just need that spark or that inspiration, which I'm starting to see as a theme, and I love that. Um,
By the way, I'm also September birthday, so I feel like I have some ideas of your daughter
oh
too.
yeah, when is your birthday?
September 15th is my birthday.
Okay, hers is the 26th. That would have been funny if it was on the same day.
Oh, so she's on the cusp. She's on the cusp then. She has some qualities like you, I'm sure.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%. She's a mini Josh.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, first of all, kudos to you for just getting up at 4 every day because it's not easy. We're not going to pretend that it's an easy thing to do. You've had to do this for a long time at this point, I assume.
Yeah, so 100% to be kind of intentional with what I want to do and how I want to show up in the world and the change that I want to see. There's a level of sacrifice that comes with that purpose, and a lot of people I don't think are able to actually make that sacrifice. They say it, but their deeds don't kind of follow through with it. And then with me, I'm not sacrificing time with my family, and I can't sacrifice the mission that I'm doing because it's a highly critical mission. So I will sacrifice sleep. That
Mm.
is the level of sacrifice that I'll have to grow intentionally where I want to grow. But yeah, it's sometimes it's difficult, but my why is big enough to where it demands a response.
Well,
Um,
you're so right that, we are full platters, so there's always something always has to give. If you
yeah.
I always talk about that also in terms of bringing something new into your life.
Mm,
Something has to give. Like, if you really want a big change, there's going to
yeah.
be a sacrifice.
If you say something yes to something new, something in your life has to give. That is such a powerful statement, and it's hard now, like where I'm doing this podcast and I'm meeting amazing people like you, Jesse. Sometimes we have very close connections, and that may blossom into something else like later down the road. And I have to find myself saying no more than yes now because we all the most probably overused quote ever in the history is 24 hours in a day. We all have 24 hours in a day.
That's right.
And I find myself as I become more I guess popular in terms of like social media and the content that I'm pushing out, I have to say no more often. And then my wife will also tell me, hey, you can't do that. So she'll check me.
Family time. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that's the saying no, the power of no is a big one. And it's really, really an important lesson for women as well, because a
Yeah.
lot of us do tend to just be these people pleasing folks, whether we like it or not. Again, a kind of a construct of society to some degree. It's really important to say no to some things if you want to say yes to others.
How did you learn to do that? Through me, I did it because of I clearly knew where I wanted to go, but throughout like your life, when was that moment that you realized I can't do that if I want to grow in this area and learn to say no? Because I think there's a cultural, but also like a difference between it's easy for a man, I feel like, to say no to things. But exactly what you just said, the female leaders that are out there today, and especially where I work right now in a SOCOM world, so a special operations command, is that the women that I've seen work in that organization have to, uh, I think, pretend that that they're not much harder, much more rough exterior, and they always have to say yes to things.
Mm.
So how did you learn to say no?
So for me, if I'm being fully honest, it was a mental health reasons. I had mental health issues after the
Mm,
whole refugee experience and all the growing up that I had always pasted a smile over the pain. I didn't really deal with
mm,
things until I came to a crisis point where I had to, I was dealing with depression, anxiety, and eating disorder. This was, in my early 20s still. And I was really, I was at a breaking point. So
yeah.
sometimes the beauty of breaking points is that you really have nothing to lose from there. But I had to restructure myself and what that means. Who am I? And for me, my mental health is number one.
Mm,
Even as a mom, even before I could put other people as a priority, my mental health comes first. And so, because my mental health comes first, I have to say no to anything that endangers it too much. And so if I'm getting overwhelmed, there's too much going on, I know that I will have to say no to things, and I do because for
mm,
me, some of these no's are, for example, look, I raise kids in a suburb, um, highly social community. I say no to
yeah.
social things. I do it all the time. And it's not because I don't want to in that moment. We all want to belong, but I
Yeah.
know that only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah. The connection is hardwired, I think, in us is that we thrive that level of connection. This is where my wife and I are totally opposite, is that she needs those connections. I do not. I can film podcasts, talk about leadership, read books, journal, do that all day long and be fully content. The human interaction with me, I get so much of it outside working is that I like to kind of just be in my space. But you said something there that was beautiful of I don't like to use the word balance, but finding a harmony between self, family, and then work or whatever our passion it is. But it starts with ourselves. And to fill our cups up is not selfish. And I think a lot of people kind of view it from that standpoint is that if we take care of ourselves, then we're being selfish. But I want to kind of flip that 180 is that when we take care of ourselves, it's a battery. We're charging our own energy supplies up so then we can go out into this world and be the best mother. Jessie can be the best mother that she needs to be and then the best author possible so we can make more of an impact. But it all starts with how we take care of ourselves. And that took me
Yeah.
a really long time.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've nailed it. And by the way, my husband is very similar to you. I have, well, I wonder, look, there's gender differences too. I wonder
Yeah.
if, I watch my little girls because I only ended up with just girls. And um, it starts pretty young, that need for connection with other girls. And
Yeah.
a lot of it. Do I have a house full of girls often? Yes.
Oh.
So, there's a chapter in Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky as well that's called Use Your Energy Wisely.
Mm,
So as we talked about, like being pulled in many directions and having only 24 hours in a day, we can all just imagine the pressures on Vladimir Zelensky. And he talks often about it. He talks often, even in his videos to his people. He says we have to take care of ourselves. We have to stay strong. We have to take care of our energy and our emotions and our psych. Because we don't. He said over and over, like we don't know how long this will take.
yeah.
He always said we will be victorious, but we don't know how long that will take. And anyone who keeps an eye on him realizes like clearly the man makes time to work out because he wears army tees, so we know he
Yeah.
doesn't. And he said in several interviews, yeah, physical exercise, he needs it.
In the military, real quick, is that we have combat T-shirts that we wear, and then I used to have a sergeant major that would tell me, "Is like that's the test, Josh. Like when people wear combat T-shirts, if they're overweight or they're not, or if they take physical training serious or not." And it's funny, yeah. So he totally takes that time to kind of fill up his cup, and then before all of this started too, you could see like that balance that he had with his family. He had such an amazing kind of balance before the war really started, and I think that's one reason that he is so intentional and able to like pour that energy into the problems that demand his time. And I love how you use that term, use your energy wisely, because as a leader, especially when you get to that level, if you grow in more of a strategic level role, the problems that demand your attention should be the problems that you focus on and not getting so mired down the tactical level decisions. So I wanted to kind of just resonate on that point of putting it through the filter of how I think in terms of military. I'd love to kind of get back to your story in 2018 where you broke away and you really started to go after employment in terms of just yourself, and then I think that's where you started writing on your own. Is that where you discovered your passion or your purpose, or like that spark moment that, hey, this is where I can connect what I love doing with the purpose or my why in the world?
Yeah. When I first started writing professionally, like started publishing articles, it's hard to think of your own story as interesting. I think we
Yeah.
all know that. I mean, our stories are very interesting to ourselves. I think the most interesting story to anyone is their own story because look, it's the way you became who you are.
Yeah.
But when I started writing with my story, the story of being an immigrant in America is a common story. But if you're able to put it into words, well, maybe you bring that experience to other people. And, I got to tell you, with my writing, the thing I get the most, people of very different walks of life will say to me, this is exactly how I feel. This is exactly what I went through. This is
Yeah.
how I had to deal. And so, what I found through the writing has been that we're really all alike in our struggles, even if they look different on the outside. So my struggle is the struggle of a refugee. Somebody else's struggle is the struggle of having whatever, an alcoholic parent, let's say. Like
Yeah.
we all struggle. That's part of life. That's part of being human. And the struggle feels the same, even if it looks, the form it takes is different. And so getting through a struggle can actually uh, become a template
Mm.
that works for other people as well. So when I started writing with my stories, and then I got a personal essay published in the New York Times or in the LA Times and some of the bigger papers. And that's when I had this realization, well, two realizations. One is that we're all connected, that we are all more similar than we think, even with whatever different idiosyncrasies of our life, we're pretty similar. And then the other one is, when you put yourself out there, you will get criticism. And if you're going to
Mhm.
take it personally, you better stop now. So you have to make a choice. And that's another, by the way, Zelensky lesson to tie that in. He really, really had to rely on his inner vision of himself and not the critics. And it's something that's been helping me a lot. In writing a book, you kind of absorb the lessons yourself. That's a big one. Whenever you put yourself in the ring, there'll be critics.
There is a quote out there. I
It's
can't
a
remember the
Roosevelt one, I think, if you're thinking about
yeah,
something like that.
Roosevelt, The Man in the Arena,
Mhm.
is that basically, to sum it up, because it's a really, really, really long quote. And my last job, when I was getting ready to transition out, I was convinced that, okay, I'm going to read this verbatim. And my wife convinced me not to do it. But like when I read it, I get so like deeply emotional about it, because when you read it, you can hear it.
Yeah,
That the man in the arena, or the woman in the
yeah.
arena, deserves the credit because they are doing the work. But too often, and that's a powerful lesson that you just said, is when we put ourselves out there, it's not praise that we usually get right away. It's criticism. And to me, that was one of the hardest things to kind of overcome when I started this whole journey, is that I was very afraid of how people were going to view me, because
Yeah.
I'm an active duty Army officer, and they're like, oh, he has an agenda. He's trying to make money and do all those things. No, I lost soldiers, and I've seen what poor leadership can do. And I'm on a mission to change that and show you that you can care about people and still be highly successful in whatever career field you want. Like, I work in SOCOM right now, and I have a totally different leadership philosophy than most people, and I have been highly successful. And that's kind of like my giant. And that was another key thing that you said, that is so true, is that we all have our own giants. Maybe it's imposter syndrome, or maybe it's a
We all
mental
have
health.
imposter syndrome too, by the way. It's
Yeah.
it's universal. Yeah.
Yeah, and we all have a giant that we have to learn to overcome, and I've learned what mine was. It's anger. I have a very short fuse on a couple of key things, but I was able to kind of overcome that by understanding who I was more on uh, a deeper level. Like, what are the core values? How do I make decisions? How do I guide like my life, who I want to grow into? And so that's beautiful. So you
I
started writing. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I just want to say it's interesting. I understand anger. That's not mine is anxiety.
Yeah,
And like you said, that the giants are different, but you need to getting over, like, you once you know yourself, and you
yeah.
know that anger is the thing that comes to bite you, then, and for me it's anxiety. You figure out, okay, I see it coming, and what do I do about it? Yeah.
Yeah, because that giant, in a way, and I love this kind of metaphor, but in military we have, dead space. It's terrain that we can't maneuver on, or we can't kind of shape or affect it. But our giant often at times is invisible to us, and it's apparent to everyone else. But when we have that aha moment that, all right, alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, gambling, that is my giant, then we can begin to call ourselves out on it. When we start to go back into that, is that when I catch myself getting mad or angry, I always go back to, I call it my strength statement, but really at the end of the day, it's an affirmation, is every day is a gift. I'm not going to waste mine. And that recenters me, because it puts me back in the mindset of like, what does it feel like to lose a soldier, knowing that you failed as a leader? Or what does it feel like on a bad day? Today is not a bad day. I can make today a great day. And what we're going through is a small problem. And that always recenters me to kind of go forward in and just be my best, most authentic, present self that I can in whatever situation that I am. But the first book that you wrote, even before we get to the one that you just released, is "Don't Just Sit There, Do Something." Was that your first like major book that you
Yeah,
that
don't
you
just sit there,
published?
do nothing. But that was a
Yeah,
joke. Don't just sit there, do nothing was like the plan words there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, with that title, how did you come up with that?
So the book is based on the teachings of the Tao Te Ching.
Mhm.
The Tao Te Ching, for those who don't know, is an ancient philosophy. Um, the Taoism has also become a religion, but it's for me, it's
Yeah.
a philosophy. For a lot of people, it's a basic philosophy of living, of how to live, and interestingly, how to live and how to lead. I would say. And so the Tao Te Ching was very helpful to me through my struggles. And so the reason it's called "Don't Just Sit There Do Nothing" is because it's also filled. The Tao is filled with paradoxes, and it's a paradoxical statement. Don't just sit there, do nothing. But a lot of the statements within the book are paradoxical as well, and so
Yeah.
they make you just sit there and think, and like, how can both be true? But as anyone who's lived in the world long enough knows that we exist in duality. So two opposite things can be true at the same time. Like you could be really stressed and have a ton to do, and you need to take 5 minutes to sit there and do nothing and center yourself. So
Yeah.
that's an example.
Chaos and order. I kinda
Yeah.
like that duality piece, and one of my favorite quotes from that was, "He who knows men is clever. He who knows himself has insight. He who conquers men has force. He who conquers himself is truly strong." Like, I was going through that, kinda preparing for this episode, and that one really paused because those first 2 points were where I was 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago on my leadership journey, but I've recently kinda switched over but it took a lot of time and self-reflection to kinda get to that. So, kinda writing through that book, what inspired you to write that book, and what are some of the key takeaways that you can apply to your leadership?
So that book was from my own personal journey. So what I did is I would take every chapter and I would start it with a verse from the Tao, and I would
Mm,
would explain how that showed up in my life. And often the way it showed up in my life was through, I mean, I also call it my humiliation book. Like like I just really share there. I'm an
yeah,
oversharer by nature. One of these days I will make it to fiction because I'm already like I've used myself up. But I go into a lot of my own mistakes in that book
mm,
in life because, again, one of those things that I realized afterwards is, oh, hey, we all make pretty similar mistakes, or
yeah,
even if the mistakes are different, we all feel the same about it. We all feel a lot of shame. Uh, we carry that shame for years after, and so in a way, for me to write about it was very therapeutic.
mm,
Again, really had to let go of caring about the opinion of others.
yeah,
But for the most part, what really, I mean, when people are helped by that book, by the "Don't Just Sit There Do Nothing" book, the things that I get are really powerful. Like, people feel like, hey, if you're able to share your big mistakes, then maybe mine aren't so bad either.
boom. That is to me, transparency is a critical attribute that I've always tried to apply. But I think transparency is probably one of the most overused words, especially in leadership. So I like to kind of think of it as leading with windows. There's always going to be a natural barrier there, because not all the information that you have needs to be shared with people. Sometimes we don't need to share every piece of information. Yeah, that's true, but
Editing.
yeah, but we should not have an agenda, of when we're kinda going into things. So, like, I like to think of transparency as leading through windows. There's always a natural barrier there, but it's an open book. You can see everything that I'm doing, so you understand kinda where I'm coming from, and that level of vulnerability, Jesse, I could already tell you're a phenomenal person and a leader because that is one of the key attributes of letting go of your ego. Confident humility is critical in leadership, especially when you have roles that you have life and limb on the line versus ego. Because if we make decisions based out of our ego, well, then they are selfish decisions. But when we can begin to make decisions from confident humility, they're selfless. So I absolutely love that. And I love how you wrote that book really in a way of kind of reflecting on your own journey. But then it goes back to something you talked about is that stories inspire. So you wrote that book throughout your journey, you turned your purpose into pain, and that story really resonated with people, and at the end of it, you probably grew and you helped shape so many other people's lives, and now we get to where we are right now, where you just wrote the book, Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky. Kinda shifting to that mindset, when did you realize that I need to write a book on this to kinda pull out those leadership lessons?
So interestingly, in Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, I had a chapter. It was called Use It. It was about the Taoist principle of using whatever life gives you, making use of
Mm.
it, not wasting anything. And that was basically a chapter about Zelensky
Oh, wow.
because I had been, as I said, in a movie with him. And for those who don't know, Zelensky was an actor comedian who created a show called Servant of the People. In that show, he played just this regular, average teacher who ended up becoming president of Ukraine. This was a show.
That is crazy.
It is insane. It is insane. It's really one of a kind story. So he created the show. It in that show, what he often did through his humor is point at what was wrong in society, what was wrong within his government. Right then, his government was really still trying to get itself out from the paw of
Rushes, yeah,
Russia, yeah,
yeah,
and a lot of corruption that was going on, and so he was really good at taking humor and pointing at that through his
mm,
humor. And people really resonated with the message of the show, and that's when he ran for actual servant of the people, which was what he called his party, and that's when he actually became president. And speaking of criticism, can you imagine the criticism that a comic who had skits where he would like pretend to play the piano with his genitals. Like he was a comedian. Can you imagine the criticism that a person like that gets when they turn serious and go into politics? So we really had to learn to shut that out. And so because I had a chapter like this in the Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, when the book came out, the war had just began and everyone wanted to talk about it. Like in interviews,
yeah,
people wanted to talk about it. I wanted to talk about it. And then I started watching him ever more closely, like a lot of us were, and I realized there were just there was enough there were enough lessons from his own journey, his story. His story, by the way, is a big part of this book of Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky. His story of like being this comedian and then this trajectory to where he is now as one of the greatest wartime leaders. And
yeah,
I think history will show it more clearly. It's hard to judge when you're in it, but I that's when I realized that there were enough lessons. The one book connected to the second book in that way. And by the way, what you had said I thought was so great about humility and letting go of the ego.
yeah,
That's a really big lesson that Zelensky exemplifies as well. Is just really not letting your ego take over, knowing your purpose, and feeling empowered because you have to feel confident and empowered, as you said, as a leader, but also at the same time balancing that out with humility.
yeah, I think that is 100%, critical, and we've talked about a lot of this already, kinda through this episode, but if you can share some of the insights from your book that maybe you haven't already shared, what are the top 3 takeaways that you would have to apply to modern leadership today that someone could take right now and just go be the best leader version of themselves, their family, the organization? It doesn't matter. What do you think are the top 3 characteristics that is from this book in Zelensky?
So, one, which we've touched upon, but I'll say it again, is realize the power of the ordinary.
Yeah,
Realize it within yourself. Realize that, yes, just an ordinary person can also be a limitless person. It's this limitless mindset. So adopt the mindset of limitlessness that you don't need to be anything different than you already are to accomplish ridiculously amazing things that no one, yourself included, thinks that it's a mindset shift.
yeah,
And that's I think that's one is realizing it for yourself, and two is also being able to empower that state for other people, like remind other people.
yeah. I think so I wrote that down. Remember the power of the ordinary, because we all have extraordinary. I think, within us. And I always kind of break the word down. I think I heard this from John Maxwell, is what is the difference between an ordinary and an extraordinary leader? Well, it's just extra. It's being able to kind of go that little bit extra, putting a little bit more time into something, or developing ourselves just a little bit more, or getting a little bit more sleep. Maybe that's what I should try to do, right?
You just got to go early if you're going to
Yeah.
go. Yeah. I mean, so it's exactly what you said. And if you can also remind other people that we're each the leader of our time, that it doesn't take that they too are ordinary and extraordinary. That's a great gift to give others. And you get the best out of people when you empower them.
Hmm. So, what are some of your favorite quotes from Zelensky, if you know any
Sure.
off the top of
But
your
I
head?
wanted to add, like, so that was one. I'll be really quick. The second would be the humility that we talked about.
Oh, nope. Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally forgot I asked you that
Yeah.
question.
No, that's okay. I remember this is see my OCD brain. I have to so the humility part of it, the humility of understanding. That's I mean, you know what? That's pretty close to the ordinary as well, but the humility of understanding I am carrying out a mission that's greater than myself.
Yeah,
It's not about me. I am here. Like I like to think of it as like for me as a writer, I like to think of it as channeling wisdom. It's not my wisdom. I don't own the wisdom. Certainly don't own the wisdom of the Tao Te Ching or the wisdom
yeah.
of Zelensky, but I let it run through. If I take my ego out of the way, the humility part is really important, I think, for everything that you do in life. Just remembering that you're a vehicle.
So I always selfless versus selfish, and
Yes.
I think if we can answer this question, regardless of where we are, is who am I here for? Who am I showing up for? If our mind immediately goes to ourselves, then that's the wrong answer. And I think that that's the separation between a toxic leader and a servant leader. And I use the term interchangeably, transformational and servant, because I think servant leaders are transformational. They're change agents, but they also serve other people. And then I use the term transitional and toxic interchangeably, because toxic leaders use people as stepping stones to advance their own career and selfish means. And at the end of the day, if you can answer that question, who am I here for? And it's someone else, then you're on the right path. So
You're
I love that.
absolutely right. And funny enough, the third being service leadership. That's a chapter in the book as well. I really believe in service leadership as well. I think that if you remember, if you're, and sadly, we see this a lot in politics. If you are there um, for some version of your own ego enhancement, we're going to see it.
Yeah.
Like people are really obvious when they're up there in front of the stage of the entire country. We see that. So
Yeah.
if you're there, if you remember to switch to a service leadership mindset, what can I do? If you're driven by what can I do for the people I'm here to serve, it's a different ball game. And we're really good at reading bullshit. So we
No,
see that.
100%.
We see it. And the reason we all connect to Zelensky so much, the reason if you watch him, you see that he's authentic, as you said, you see his heart is in it. And he's able to toggle both being a heartful person and being a leader. So being confident and coming from the heart. And we see that we can read when it's not there, and we see it clearly when it is.
I think one of the superpowers, I think within humility itself and humanity itself, is being able to see through unauthentic people, and it may not be immediate. And I come from the line of that. I've had many great leaders, and I've had very poor leaders, and I've had some leaders that say all the right things, but they never do the right things.
Mm.
If you're with someone long enough, their true character will show. And if you give someone power long enough, their true character will show. And I think that is our ability. And that's another great example that you just talked about, is people are always watching. They're always watching you. You have your critics, like we talked about, the man in the arena. And
Mhm.
then you have people who actually look to you for inspiration, because you are their role model. People are always watching you, and you have to be centered. And I think it goes back to all the key topics that we've talked about before. We have to be selfless. We have to let go of our ego. We have to confidently know who we are, show up in this world. So our models or our behavior is modeled through the mirrors of others. That those are some absolutely great wisdom points. So, all right, now to
Now I'm gonna go to
what
the
is your favorite quote?
You know what's so funny is I just had like I wanted to just finish that thought because an interesting thing that you may have noticed is that all of these things flow into one another.
100%.
Because great leadership, it's like what I said before, like our struggles may take different shape, but
Yeah.
dealing with it is similar. It's the same with leadership. Like it may look different whether you're the leader of a military or a country or just a family, but the things that go into it that flow together well to make a wholesome leader, even for your own life, they're all the same.
Mm. There's two of my favorite quotes, and I think it's really a theme that we've talked about here. So the president can't change the country on his own, but what he can do is he can give an example. So that's number one, like kind of like modeling the way. And number two is people don't really believe in words, or rather, people believe in words only for a stretched period of time. Then they start to look for action. So everything that we've talked about, deeds, not words, aligning, creating alignment within our heart, but also being able to model the way and show other people the standard that we expect, regardless of where it is, if in a leadership role or within our family or even within our community. This is the standard that I expect. So what is yours?
Yeah, and by the way, I love that first quote too, that you can't obviously no leader can change anything on their own. Nothing is done
Yeah.
on your own. Nobody could do anything on their own. That's a thing
No.
that we need to remember. I need to remember because as I said, like writing is a solitary undertaking, but you know what? Getting a book out there and spreading the word, not solitary, not
No.
gonna work. So I need you and I need your listeners too so it's just a really interesting reminder. It's really not about I'm going to take this and I'm going to scale this on my own. It's about realizing the power that you hold in that moment. Like somebody like
Yeah.
Zelensky holds so much power for his people. And so the reason I think he's been doing such a great job is he always remembers what his role is
Mm,
and is being like this sort of megaphone for the people. And so that's a quote I'm going to read right now. But another thing I want to say, there's a really cool chapter. I'm not going to go into it now, but I call it the PR chapter. It's called
mm,
Know Your Message, Know Your Audience,
that's great.
because he's so good at communicating with it's really a communication chapter, I would say
Yeah.
also. We all need to improve our communication, whether it's with relationships in our lives or with people who work with and for us. So it's a good chapter of because I think that one of the things about Zelensky is he is a master communicator.
Yeah, 100%.
So this quote is actually from a former advisor of his, and I share it because I want to remind people, even though the book is about Zelensky, it's really about the Ukrainian people as well.
Mm,
So this advisor said, his name was Igor Novikov. He said about Zelensky, he has a performer's sixth sense of what people want. And in a time of crisis, he is a lens that channels the energies of the people into a single beam of light.
mm.
And to me, that's what a great leader does. It's not about just that leader. It's about if the ability to bring out the best in the people you're leading.
There's a something I learned, and it's kind of similar within that, but the rule of refraction is that oftentimes as a leader, we always get the light kind of put on us, but great leaders are able to bend the light from us to other people, like giving them credit, giving them praise, because they're the ones that actually make it. But the other thing there too is taking all the resources that we have collectively as a team and then working towards a common goal or a vision and channeling that into a beam of light, which really gets into that quote. I love that. So
Yeah.
how can people find this book? What's the easiest way?
Okay. So Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky. I think it's an easy title to remember, so I can probably
100%.
stop repeating it. It's a really sold wherever you find your book. So whether it's Amazon or Bookshop for indie bookstores or Barnes and Noble or your local bookstore, it's everywhere books are sold. And I should mention that it's available in three formats. One is the actual book, a physical copy of the book. Then there's a digital copy for those of us who are Kindle people. We don't want to keep filling our house with books. If I didn't use Kindle, I would be in trouble. I wouldn't have space left.
I'm already in trouble. My wife is mad at me.
Yeah. I do
I have too
both.
many
I do
books.
both. I do both. I can't do just one as much as as an author. Obviously, I love physical books, but I read a lot,
Yeah.
and I just can't do. It's really important for me to have some digitally, and then also it's available as an audiobook. I also think some personal development books are great on audio,
Yeah.
and so it's read. Interestingly enough, it's read by this wonderful uh, voice actress of Ukrainian heritage.
Mm.
And we had such a synchronicity. I thought it was so funny. She reached out to me after she recorded the book. Her now husband was a cinematographer in that very movie where I had crossed paths with Zelensky.
Oh, wow.
So it all
That
comes together.
Well, I think everything there's always threads throughout our lives. I think Tony Robinson had a famous quote that's very sticky is that success leaves breadcrumbs. But I
Mm,
also think that there's threads within our lives is that we're all connected. There's always a connection. We
yeah,
just have to find it. Um,
yeah.
and then when we do, we can grow. All right. So out of respect of your time, I try to keep this to an hour. So we're at our final show segment. These are the same 4 questions that I ask everyone. I call them the killer bees. So be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. So if you're ready, we'll dive right in.
Okay, I'm ready. This is fun.
Okay. So what do you believe separates a good leader from a extraordinary leader?
The ability to forget about yourself,
Mm, love
to
it.
become one with what you're here to do.
So question 2. What is one resource, and I think I know what you're going to say. What is one resource that you can recommend to our listeners to kind of grow on their leadership?
Oh, am I gonna say unlocking your inner Zelensky? You know what? I would. This is so true. Yes, yes, unlocking your Zelensky. Please, by the way, I'm donating some of the proceeds to help rebuild it, Ukraine, to rebuilding efforts there. So yes, please do get a copy. But also, honestly, stillness.
Mm,
Making room for just a few moments of stillness to reconnect with your center.
yeah, silence is powerful. And as the older I get, the more I relish of just being able to have some silence. So, question 3, if you can give your younger self a piece of advice, go back in time, what would it be and why?
Believe more in yourself and listen more to your inner voice and shut out that external noise.
Mm. All right,
And
last one.
for all the reasons we talked about, because the
Yeah.
external noise is not always to your benefit. Usually it's not.
Well, I think that's the power about this podcast in general is that we kind of go through like your whole story to where you're at right now in your journey, and it's incredible. You truly have an incredible story. But the last one that I would love to get to is how can our listeners find you, and how can they add value to your mission?
So I'm at jessiekanzer.com, JessieKanzer. That's my website. And it's also at Jessie Kanzer for Instagram, at Daily Dow for TikTok. But all of that is linked on my website. You can find links to both books, to Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky and Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, or the information like my story, the video essay that you found. So everything lives on my website. But you can bring value to my mission by honestly getting yourself a copy in whatever format of Unlocking Your Inner Zelensky right now. I think that this book and what I'm trying to do with it is bigger than myself. And so
Yeah.
I have future goals. I do. I have other books I want to write, but right now that's what my focus is on. So
Jesse, this has been a phenomenal episode. And I'm not joking that I think I have like 6 pages of notes of while we were going through here because I love it. I love bringing people on who have different perspectives outside of leadership that I just don't see because you cover my blind spots and my dead space and you help me grow. So thank you for adding value to me. And selfishly, I love interviewing people when it comes to leadership because it helps me continue to grow on my journey. But this has been a phenomenal episode with a lot of great wisdom points.
thank you so much for having me. And I too think it's important that we come together from different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.